Sri Lankan Investment Forum. Vietnam to attract foreign and private investment to develop infrastructure. Hello and welcome to this edition of Bizline brought to you by VTV International. You're with me, Lina Pham, and as usual, we'll begin our program by reviewing the economic highlights over the past week. Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe attended the Sri Lanka-Vietnam Investment Forum on Tuesday afternoon as part of his official visit to Vietnam. The Sri Lankan Prime Minister expressed his belief that the trade relationship between the two countries should reach $1 billion in the coming time. Representatives of Sri Lankan and Vietnamese firms said they hoped to make the most of closer business ties. The Asia-Pacific Cooperative Ministers' Conference have taken place in Vietnam until April 21st. The event gathers nearly 200 international delegates from 21 countries and territories. The event is an occasion to introduce Vietnam's land, people, and cooperative culture to the world, as well as an opportunity to further boost cooperation in the field. Themed Visioning Ahead to 2030, promoting stronger partnerships between government and cooperative stakeholders in organized sustainable development goals. The event will include 6 sessions featuring various topics. The conference was established in 1990 by the International Cooperative Alliance Asia Pacific. It is an event to provide a platform for cooperatives and governments to discuss new forms of cooperation between them. The 27th Vietnam International Trade Fair, or Vietnam Expo 2017, kicked off in Hanoi International Exhibition Center on April the 19th. The event is jointly held by the Trade Promotion Agency under the Ministry of Industry and Trade and Vietnam National Trade Fair and Advertising Company. The trade fair is part of activities to celebrate APEC Year 2017 and will connect Vietnamese and international enterprises and trade organizations. Vietnam Expo 2017 has attracted over 500 enterprises from 23 nations and territories in the world, including representatives of APEC members. Many of Vietnam's key products are being showcased, such as craft products, food and beverages. Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc visited the southern province of Bình Thuận on Wednesday, where he delivered a speech on investment promotion. In his speech, he urged the southern coastal province to develop its maritime economy, tourism, high-quality agriculture, and renewable energy. The Prime Minister called for improvements in administrative procedures to create an open business climate and enable Bình Thuận to become one of the top 20 provinces in the Provincial Competitive Index. At the event, investment licenses were presented to 14 projects worth $1.86 billion, and a memorandum of understanding on investment in 20 projects worth $3.6 billion was signed. Deputy Prime Minister Vương Đình Huệ has said a new government decree should make investment into agriculture easier. Nearly $17 million in government money has been poured into 64 projects nationwide in the last 3 years. Meanwhile, current policies do not have regulations on forming new businesses in rural areas. Therefore, the new decree must support investors in terms of tax exemption and land lease, in addition to financial supports. According to the Deputy Prime Minister, agriculture is still the foundation of the economy, but investors and farmers face a lot of risks. The new decree has to be implemented within this year and support many factors, including family farms, households, and cooperatives. Plans for land usage also have to be published in the decree. Vietnam and Malaysia recorded two-way trade of nearly $2.27 billion in the first quarter of 2017, a year-on-year increase of 39.7%, according to the Vietnamese Trade Office in Malaysia. Vietnam exported computers, electronic products and spare parts and mobile phones and components in the first quarter, Malaysian businesses have invested a total of more than $12 billion in Vietnam, focusing on oil and gas, real estate, trade and tourism. We have just reviewed some of the economic highlights over the past week. Up next in our crosstalk, we'll talk about how to attract foreign and private investment to develop Vietnam's infrastructure. Vietnam has been developing its infrastructure as a way to attract more foreign investors in the country. According to statistics, it will need almost $500 billion of investment capital for infrastructure by 2020. Meanwhile, the state budget can meet just a third of this demand. In addition, Official Development Aid or ODA fund has seen a decline as Vietnam became a lower middle-income country and is expected to turn to high middle-income country by 2035. Therefore, Vietnam is calling capital from foreign investors and private sector to continue promoting its infrastructure system. So how to realize such a goal? We'll talk with Mr. Eric Sidwick, Country Director of the Asian Development Bank in Vietnam, to learn more about this. But first, let's take a look at the following clip for an overview on Vietnam's infrastructure investment compared with other regional countries.
Vietnam may be one of the smallest economies in Asia, but it is one of the leading countries in terms of investment in infrastructure, according to Bloomberg. A report by the Asian Development Bank indicates that Vietnam's public and private infrastructure investment has averaged 5.7% of GDP in recent years, the highest in Southeast Asia and second in Asia, behind only China's 6.8%. Indonesia and the Philippines spent less than 3%, while in Malaysia and Thailand it has been under 2%. Vietnam is among the fastest growing countries in the world and is improving its infrastructure to attract more foreign investors.
Mr. Eric Sidwick, thank you very much for joining our Bizline program today.
You're very welcome.
Vietnam is among leading countries in Asia in terms of investing in infrastructure development, but is also one of the smallest economies in the region. So this is according to ADB recent report. So what do you assess of the growth of the infrastructure development in Vietnam in recent years?
Well, I think the first point to make, as you have made, is that Vietnam has done very well. It has spent in the last few years an average of about 5.7% on infrastructure investment, which is high compared to other countries in the region. And so that's about $10 to $12 billion a year, which is a significant amount. That investment in infrastructure you see all around Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh and Da Nang. You see big expressways, you see power lines and transmission lines. You see access to water supply and sanitation, particularly in urban areas, and you see a development of the ICT. So if you put those four infrastructures together, Vietnam has done very well so far in meeting the needs of the country.
So as you just mentioned, 5.7% of GDP growth, investment in infrastructure development is impressive. But how does it make an impact on the real infrastructure system in Vietnam, and how does it translate into other economic activities?
Well, of course, infrastructure is only an ingredient in the economic growth process. So Vietnam has done very well in investing in infrastructure. So you can't have sustained economic growth if you don't have the infrastructure in place. And if the infrastructure doesn't keep pace with the demands. At the same time, Vietnam has not only been successful in achieving high rates of economic growth, but the distribution or the allocation of that wealth, accumulated wealth, has also been quite good in Vietnam compared to other countries. And again, infrastructure has played an important part in connecting markets, connecting people, allowing energy to be virtually available everywhere in the country. Technology is also gaining into other rural areas as well as urban areas. And so these are all very critical factors to spread the benefits of economic growth. And Vietnam has so far been quite successful in that endeavor.
In recent times, investment in infrastructure has helped Vietnam attract foreign direct investment or FDI. FDI surged to a record $15.8 billion in 2016. This Korean enterprise invested $100 million in its manufacturing plant in the One Industrial Park in Hanam Province, thanks to convenient transportation after the Gaozi-Ningping Highway was built.
It is a short distance for our trucks to travel from the factory to the highway, so we decided to choose this location.
However, the challenges are formidable, with the demand for investment in infrastructure being huge and the state budget unable to meet this demand. Vietnam needs investment worth around $480 billion in infrastructure in the period to 2020, including for 11 power plants with a total capacity of 13,200 megawatts and some 1,380 kilometers of highways. For the transportation sector, the state budget can manage only $9.2 million out of a requirement of nearly $43.9 billion in 2016-2020.
Vietnam anticipates a need of nearly $500 billion in infrastructure development in the next decade. And this is a huge number, so the Vietnamese government should consider other funding sources rather than just using the state budget. So what are your recommendations? What's your view on this?
Well, there are different sources of funding, as you say. The government budget is certainly a resource which has been used, as we've just discussed. Having said that, there is probably still more resource that can be used from domestic resources in Vietnam, including through taxation. So the government has foot the bill for a lot of the infrastructure. Our sense is that it could pay for more infrastructure. Part of the reason for that is that we feel the tax effort of the country has actually declined a little bit over recent years. And so the tax effort of the country needs to get back up again so that domestic resources can be used more for government contribution. Having said that, there are development partners such as the Asian Development Bank and others, and bilaterals as well as multilaterals, that have also contributed quite significantly to the infrastructure development of Vietnam. That investment is likely to continue, but because Vietnam has been doing so well, over the next couple of years, Vietnam will graduate both from the World Bank concessional financing and also from the Asian Development Bank concessional financing. So while that money is still available now and will be available in the future, it might get a little bit more expensive. Having said that, that money is still cheaper than going out into the capital markets. And so the real key for Vietnam is to continue improving the fiscal situation so it can devote more of its own resources, attract development partner funding, including from ADB, but over the longer term, try to tap more private sector financing.
As you just mentioned, private investment just take for 10% of the investment in infrastructure in Vietnam, while that number in other countries in Asia is much higher. For example, in India, it's about 30%. So can you explain why there is such a big gap?
Well, I think, in India, it is a more advanced economy than Vietnam is at this current stage. I think there are three factors that limit private sector funding in investment and infrastructure in Vietnam. I think the first is the regulatory side. The regulation is still relatively complicated and it needs to be more unified and more coherent. So recently the government has adopted a new decree for private and public participation, a PPP decree. ADB and other development partners help support that effort. So the regulatory environment is still a little bit more certain now. I think it's the application now that will be a key test. The second point is for Vietnam to help develop what is called bankable projects. So attracting private sector financing into infrastructure needs the counterpart government financing as well. So developing private-public partnerships is really about assessing and managing the risks as well as the benefits of a particular project. So developing this bankable project concept is still relatively new in Vietnam. The process has to be open and transparent. It has to meet international standards if Vietnam wishes to attract investment from abroad still, not just the financing, but also the technology and the innovation that comes with it. So developing bankable projects is easy to say, but in practice it involves a lot of discussions and an understanding for what the private partnership, public partnership would be in the specific areas. They differ from different areas. And I think the other factor that's still limiting the participation of the private sector in Vietnam is the capital market is not very well developed. There is a banking sector that is servicing financial intermediation, but there is a need to have more diversified instrument, more flexible instruments, more attractive instruments for the private sector to come in from abroad. But I think with better implementation of regulation, a better sense of what bankable projects are, and a deeper capital market, over time, this will encourage more private sector investment for infrastructure in Vietnam.
According to the Ministry of Planning and Investment, capital allocation for infrastructure for the next 5 years will consist of 75% from domestic sources and 25% from foreign investment. Of the 25%, $68 billion will be FDI and $40 billion will be from ODA. The country has been stepping up efforts to attract foreign investment in its transport infrastructure, including in the construction of highways, railways, seaports, and airports. Japan and South Korea are the two biggest investors in Vietnam's transport infrastructure.
In terms of the financial assistance, the infrastructure is the most share from Japan to Vietnam. And currently we are implementing a number of projects from power station construction, and then the road construction, and also the most important one, the construction of urban railways. And in the future, we are going to consider more on infrastructure, particularly to provide high-quality infrastructure in line with the Japanese government's policy.
Besides financial assistance, Vietnam has also been seeking know-how from other countries to develop its infrastructure. Recently, Vietnam and Japan collaborated for technology transfer to improve the management, operation, and maintenance of the former urban railways. Through JICA, the Hanoi Metro Company signed a memorandum of understanding with Tokyo Metro in January 2016 for technology transfer assistance for the development of Vietnam's metro system. The establishment of a Vietnam Tokyo Metro office in Hanoi City in early April is expected to be the basis for developing cooperation between companies of the two nations.
Japan is very good at construction and operation of urban railway system, as you can see in Tokyo and Osaka. Efficient connection and also the synchronization of service criteria is really a key for the best service for the people. And I think that the Tokyo Metro is capable of doing all of this from their experiences in Tokyo.
Vietnam has many crucial projects planned, and the PPP or public-private partnership is crucial. However, PPP is still at its early stage in Vietnam. So what are the challenges in setting up these deals in Vietnam?
Well, as I said, I think the regulation is in place. It needs to be applied. We have helped support what we call a project development facility. So this is a facility that would help prepare projects and line up a selection of bankable projects. So these are projects that have gone through feasibility studies, discussions with government and the private sector on sharing of benefits and risks. So really developing projects that are ready to be financed and to be implemented. From that list of bankable projects, make sure you prepare well start with a few projects perhaps, make sure those start well, and then get to more complicated projects down the line. Of course, there is a huge need, and PPPs may be easier in some areas or in some sectors than in others. So, you know, the government should pick and choose the areas where it thinks not only is there a great need for the investment, but where the private sector has the most interest and is assured of its returns that it expects from the project.
Mm-hmm. So what recommendation do you have for the private sector to get more involvement in infrastructure development in Vietnam?
Well, I think the private sector is already interested. I mean, I know at the Asian Development Bank here in our office, we get visits from many private sector companies, chambers of commerce, who express a strong interest in investing in Vietnam. Vietnam is an attractive destination, and there's already a lot of foreign direct investment here. And so this is testament that the environment is ripe. But actually bringing money for investing in infrastructure and is more complicated and so harder to achieve. But the interest is there. What the private sector seems to be looking for is a more open and competitive market that is a little bit more transparent, more coherent, closer to international standards, and that way it can be assured that its investment will yield returns, that those returns are real, and that those returns can be either reinvested in the country or repatriated to their home country or the home company.
According to the Ministry of Transport, the public-private partnership model is ideal for meeting the demand for infrastructure development, despite the incomplete legal framework. Vietnam has been tapping the public-private partnership format to raise capital. The first target is the construction of some 1,800 kilometers of highway connecting Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, the country's longest road to date, with up to 10 lanes. The country plans to use public funds to cover 40% of the $13 billion plus required for the highway and solicit private partnership to cover the rest. The public-private partnership model will also be used for many other projects, including the Long Thanh International Airport in the south, high-speed railways, and metro area transit systems.
So Vietnam's heavy investment in infrastructure development can be rewarded by two main factors. The first is Vietnam's high GDP growth rate in recent years, and the second is the increases in FDI into Vietnam. But some experts think that there is no need for Vietnam to participate to run the infrastructure development race. So do you think is this a valid point?
I think the first thing to say that this is not a race. Every country has its specific needs, and when you compare ratios or speeds of investment across countries, some of these comparisons are not so informative. Investment in a particular country needs to match the needs and the capacities of the country. So for Vietnam, of course, there is need for more investment, but there is also a need for better investment, and there is a need for investment to match the capacity to absorb the investment. So the reform agenda is not just about attracting money. It is about how can that money be put to best use. It's about the quality of the infrastructure that is being provided. It's about the efficiency with which that infrastructure is being maintained as well. It's about the targeting of that infrastructure. Where are the needs greatest for the biggest bang, for the biggest economic impact? Not just on growth rate, but on who benefits from the growth rate, so more inclusive growth. And of course, infrastructure these days has to be climate change resilient. And so these are easy things to say, but in practice, it is harder to put into effect. These are areas that Vietnam and other countries still need to work on. So it's not so much a race, but it's a sequencing of what type of investment Vietnam will benefit the most from on its road, as you said in the introduction, to becoming an upper middle income country. More investment is going to be required, but better investment is also going to be required.
Mm-hmm. So what's your recommendation for the next step or the master plan of infrastructure development in Vietnam in the next decade?
I think there are several things that could be said on this. I think the first point to note is that the way Vietnam has delegated foreign direct investment to the provinces has been a model that has brought many advantages, because provinces can compete for the private investment or for the infrastructure development. So that has brought many advantages. The infrastructure is quite well spread around the country. But our sense is that some infrastructure needs to be national infrastructure. So not every province can have an airport. Not every province should have a port. Not every province needs critical infrastructure. So the way forward is a better prioritization of what infrastructure is needed in which parts of the country, depending on what type of growth poles or economic activities the country wants to adopt. So we're beginning to see some of this specialization across the country already, and so that may continue or it may evolve, but Vietnam needs to know a direction on nationally important strategic investments. And once it knows that direction, it can then align the resources to achieve the mapping that it so decides.
Once again, thank you very much for joining our Bizline program today.
You're very welcome.
In order to ensure capital for Vietnam's infrastructure, including transport system, Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc has recently asked the Ministry of Transport to speed up plans to attract more private investment. As such, it will help attract more FDI in the country, contributing to foster economic growth, which is forecast by the World Bank to be at more than 6% until 2019, among the top performers in the world. And that also wraps up this edition of Bizline. Thank you very much for watching. You can always rewatch our program at vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. From our team here in Hanoi, until next time.